We have the new Sony A9 III. It has 120 frames per second blackout free. It has a global shutter that allows it to do all this crazy stuff, including tracking fast action. And it has pre-capture, which means it's capturing images before you press the shutter. We're gonna test it out.
We've tested it for sports already, but we wanna see how it does for wildlife, because wildlife is really high action, and not just wildlife, but pets, which a lot of portrait photographers need to shoot, get that action shot. So we'll get started right away with our 2 dogs. But first we want to thank our sponsor, Adorama. Adorama is where you go if you decide you want to pre-order the A9 Mark III. And when you do, you'll get a bunch of VIP points from Adorama that you can spend on future purchases. They have the best customer support, the fastest shipping, the most things in stock, and they often give you free stuff whenever you shop. So please use our link. That lets Adorama know that you appreciate unbiased reviews like this.
We tried going out and getting animal pictures, but we couldn't find birds hunting and striking fast in a way that would really show off this camera's capabilities. So instead, we got our dog's favorite Bolly, some treats, and we're gonna show you what this camera can do with our dogs. Whee! Good girl, Pixel. Good girl, Kit. I got a ball. Ready?
I've never shot anything like this.
Cookie.
In a second and a half, it gave me 180 perfectly focused shots, but there's always one split second that's a little better than the rest. Other cameras, including Sony's, can't see Pixel's dark eyes with her dark mask, where they get tricked into thinking her spots are eyes, but the A9 III didn't miss a shot.
I think we got it.
People who don't shoot action always think there's no need for 120 frames per second, but it lets you capture better split-second moments faster than your human reaction time would allow. With 120 frames per second, I can pick the photo where Kit's ears float like a bunny. With 10 frames per second or even 30 frames per second, those moments are probably completely missed. Shooting 120 frames per second really does improve your photography, but it adds some challenges too. First, the camera slowed way down after only a second and a half, and once the buffer fills, it takes 9.5 seconds to clear the buffer, regardless of whether you're shooting RAW or JPEG. Second, in a 10-minute session with the dogs, I shot 4,100 photos, and there's no quick way to scrub through the photos with the camera, so I couldn't easily review or show the photos at the shoot. Third, if we were shooting RAW, I would have used 115 gigabytes of storage in just 10 minutes. I'd recommend Sony's 1900 gigabyte CF Express Type A cards to get through a good day of sports or wildlife photography. Unfortunately, a redundant pair of cards will cost you an additional $2,800. So use 120 frames per second sparingly.
So the stills are amazing, but what about video? They've added animal IAF during video, which the Sony cameras haven't been able to do before. So let's see if we can keep up. You know, the AI system is seeing the shape of their bodies even when they're not facing the camera, which is pretty good. But it does keep losing the shape when they're a little smaller in the frame.
Even at 4K at 120 frames per second, the A9 III had the best video autofocus for tracking animals that I've ever tested. It still wobbled in and out sometimes, though. It's still not nearly as good as shooting still photos, which is one of the reasons you shoot still photos instead of shooting video. But now for a real challenge, photos and videos of birds with a 600mm f4 lens.
People always ask me, why would you need 120 frames per second for wildlife? Like, so many wildlife pictures have been taken up to this point without this technology. And the answer is you'll get better shots. You just will, because even at 30 frames per second, there are moments between the moments you capture where everything lines up a little more beautifully, where the wing and the light are just in the right position. And animals move so fast. Humans cannot even comprehend it. When a bird strikes a fish to pull it out of the water and then shakes it, even at 30 frames per second, you're missing so many things. But that is the true potential of wildlife photography, is to capture things that we couldn't otherwise see with our regular human eyes. And 120 frames per second stills really allows us to do that.
So far, the A9 III's autofocusing is really good. It's focusing through some grasses and things, but there are also some times when it misses. So I had a hawk fly through and I had it in the autofocus box, but the camera seemed to be distracted by a lot of grasses in the background. That can be a very typical autofocus failure, so I won't count that against the A9 III. It is keeping up, it still has good focus, and the pictures look good so far.
The A9 III is the best wildlife camera for a good day of photography, but the worst for a bad day of photography. Here's the thing, it's only 24 megapixels, and I'll usually shoot wildlife with a 50 megapixel A1 or a 45 megapixel Z9, and that means on a bad day, like today is a bad day, all the birds are really far away. On a bad day, I can really crop in. If there's something flying wildly around, I can just use my 600 f4 with a fairly wide angle of view, and it's easier to keep things in the frame. With the A9 and 24 megapixels, I really have to fill the frame if I'm going to get usable shots. Now, on a good day of wildlife photography, the birds are up close, they're flying towards you, and you can fill the frame, and 24 megapixels is fine. But on a bad day, you'll be getting it back to the computer and wishing you had a little more detail, wishing you could crop a little bit closer. I'm offsetting that distance by adding a teleconverter when I wouldn't normally use one. But that teleconverter means my angle of view is narrower, and that makes the whole process a little bit harder. Earlier, I needed the teleconverter in order to fill the frame with an egret, but then it started flying towards me, and because it was moving, I couldn't keep it in the frame, and at that point, I really wanted to be wider without the teleconverter. So it's kind of difficult to not have the option to crop and still get 24 megapixels of detail like I could on a high megapixel camera. Nikon has a cool solution. Their 600 f4 has the teleconverter built in, so I can just flip it on and off like that, and I wish Sony had one of those.
Here's an example of what you can expect from the resolution difference. 45 megapixels, definitely better, but is it twice as good? No, it's not nearly twice as good, because it's not just the megapixels that are limiting the detail that you capture in the image, but rather the subject movement, the optical qualities of the air, the humidity in the air bouncing light around. All these things come together to overall reduce detail, which means these are closer than you might expect. Nikon does have a couple other advantages though. First, their 600mm f4 lens has a built-in teleconverter, which means for faraway subjects it's very easy to get closer. That means with the flip of a switch, I go from 600mm to 840mm. With the Sony, you could attach a separate teleconverter, but you would have to take off the lens and pull it out of your pocket, and as a result, it's not quite as readily available. Also, the Nikon goes down to ISO 64. Here we're at ISO 100. The Sony has a lower limit of ISO 250. That means the camera has to adjust up the shutter speed and adjust up the aperture in order to not overexpose the photo. And we'll see the differences as we zoom in. Here the Nikon gives us drastically more detail and a cleaner image too. Look how many more of the individual feathers you can see. And these are the details that wildlife photographers really care about. For still subjects, I still think the Z8 and Z9 with Nikon's 600 f4 TC win, but even a Sony A1 with 50 megapixels and a lower base ISO would produce much better images.
I'm feeling like the A9 Mark III is a good second camera for wildlife photographers to have. Like if you're a Sony photographer, you get the A1, but then you keep one of these in your bag. You keep one of these in your bag for those times when you need the fast action, or you want to record video, since it's got that amazing video IAF. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I think the A9 Mark III is the best Sony camera for wildlife video. It does 4K at an amazing 120 frames per second. Some other cameras do that. What makes it unique is the ability to track animals' eyes while recording video. Most people don't even realize that when you're shooting stills on the A1, the autofocus is amazing with wildlife, but you switch to video and it just becomes very dumb. They added that intelligence from stills over to video, and it works pretty well. It doesn't work nearly as well as it does with stills. It lags. It doesn't identify the subject quite as well. I think because it's doing a lot of background work, processing all that video, it's not quite the same, but it's way better than any other Sony camera. I've been shooting video with the Nikon Z8 or Z9 because they have had animal eye detect in video. And I would say this is about on par with the Nikon cameras, which is good that you now get this in the Sony system. But I'll probably still shoot video with my Nikon Z9 because it will do 8K at 60 frames per second raw, whereas this only does 4K. And I find that 8K really useful because with wildlife, you frequently need to crop in, and you kind of want to crop in, because you want to shoot with a wider angle of view, because if it's a flying bird or something, it can be difficult to keep it in the frame while you have it on something like a gimbal like this. It's harder than if you're hand holding it and shooting stills. So for Sony shooters, I think it makes sense to add an A9 Mark III to your kit for those times when you want that beautiful wildlife video. If you want to check out the tripod I use for this, the lens coat that I have on my 600 f4, all of this gear is available at Adorama. Adorama is where we buy all of our new gear from this link right here. They are the camera store for creators. They understand us. They can answer your questions. They have the best inventory. They fastest shipping. You get VIP points, which you can spend on future purchases, and they frequently throw in free stuff when you buy things. So use our link to visit Adorama. That keeps unbiased reviews like this coming. Thanks for supporting us, Adorama.
Oftentimes when I'm doing a fast pan like that in wildlife photography, I end up with rolling shutter problems. And if you don't know what that is, it's when basically all of the straight lines in the picture become slanted. And it can even distort your subject, like you can see in this hummingbird photo. The A9 III has a global shutter, which means it has an instantaneous readout speed, and without getting into all the nerdy mumbo jumbo, it basically just means you will not get rolling shutter, you won't get slanted lines, and you won't get distortion. Now, before the A9 III, I was shooting with the Sony A1, and it has a stacked sensor, so I wasn't getting a lot of rolling shutter anyways, but this ensures that you will have none. It completely eliminates the problem, which means that your photos will be as true to real life as possible. Before we even do our summary, we just want to say this is not a final review because we don't have access to the raw files to test the image quality. If you want to see that, be sure to subscribe because we'll be doing those tests. Overall, we think that the A9 III is great for someone interested in sports and fast-paced wildlife if you want to catch those fast action birds and activity and things where you know you don't want to even just miss a moment. The image quality is good. If you're okay with the 24 megapixels, then it's going to be great for you.
In the comments down below, let me know what you think. Do the A9 III's unique features make it worth the $6,000 price tag?
If you're thinking about getting this camera or any other gear, tripods, computers, really anything you can think of that you would need to create a photo, consider going to our sponsor, Adorama. They make this review possible, but they also make buying photo gear easy, fast, and more affordable because you get VIP points, which means when you buy something, you can apply them to your next purchase and save money. So thanks, Adorama, for making shopping fun and easy, but for also making this video possible. Thanks.
Bye.